What's up guys, welcome to the second video in the Learn Keyshot video series. Today's video will be about the secret ingredients to getting better renders. This presentation is to help you build a foundation of knowledge on rendering and also showing you the topics I will be covering in the other videos. Before we start, I do have to give credit to the Blender Guru. This presentation is based off a video he did on photorealism, but I just kind of adopted it more towards industrial design. If you're interested, link will be down in the description below. And with that, let's get right into it. So to get started, this is how I see the process of getting a really good render. You have to start from the bottom and climb your way up to the top, starting with great modeling. Then comes the effective creation of materials and textures. Then nail the lighting, and then get into the post-processing and the camera settings. All of this together will make for a far better render. So starting from the bottom, what is photorealistic modeling? Photorealistic modeling is matching the proportions and minor details from the real world. Here's some ways or simple tips to achieve this. First thing is to never have an unfilleted edge. Not having a fillet can prevent certain highlights from appearing within the model and can make it look flat. All edges in nature have some sort of fillet on them, so to achieve a photoreal model, you have to make sure to add in those fillets in. Next is to try your best to mimic those little details we see in products, such as with the image of the iPhone. Things like part lines, tolerances between parts, the embossed parts, logos, and chords. These things can go a long way in making your render better and giving it a little bit more life. Lastly, for modeling, try your best to have a reference object that is somewhat similar to what you're trying to model. This is great because you can refer back and to see what those minor details may be that you may need to add in. And this will also help you down the line when you have to go in to make the materials, which goes perfectly into our next topic, photorealistic materials. Photorealistic materials are when textures match real-world materials. Here's some ways to get there. One of the main ways is to use PBR textures. These are textures that have been photoscanned to be as accurate as possible. A lot of textures in Keyshot are really good and have gone through the same process. But when you need a new kind of material that isn't available, make sure it is a PBR one. In the description, I will link to a document with a long list of places to download these type of textures. Lastly, try your best to match those minor details. This is where the reference can come into play. Looking for those imperfections like warping, wear, bumps, and transparency, and trying your best to match them. It's important to nail that so you can highlight these features later on with your lighting setup, which goes into our next topic, photorealistic lighting. Photorealistic lighting is lighting that matches the color, direction, and intensity as seen in real life. First thing is that you need to nail the color of the lights. Studio lights are of course white, but if you render in an environment, use this scale to see what temperature of light to use, whether it's supposed to be a render in midday or in a sunset-like setting. This can be applied to different types of lights and can even be used for natural lighting. Probably the easiest way to get good lighting is to use an HDRI. HDRIs are basically lighting environments where the scene lighting is projected onto the model. This is probably the most accurate form of lighting since all lighting colors, intensity, and direction have been accounted for. Lastly, make sure to have a reference image that you may want to imitate, not only for the lighting, but also the composition and feel you may be aiming for. Like before, make sure to have those references on hand. And going into the last step is post-processing. So photorealistic post-processing is the reproduction of imperfections from real-life cameras and the editing of the image. First, play around with the focal length of the cameras in Keyshot. A shorter focal length will give you a wider field of view, as opposed to a longer one, which will give you a smaller field of view. Let me show you why this makes a big difference. So here we have 3 different photos from the same position of the same pieces of bread, but with different focal lengths. As you can see, the longer one allows for a closer and far more detailed image. This is ideal for a lot more close-ups, while a shorter length showcases a lot more of the environment, a lot more ideal for in-context images. Next thing to do is to try to use depth of field. With this, you actually choose a place of focus while other things in your scene get blurred out, such as on the render on the right. And what this does is actually allows for a lot more depth within your scene, giving a foreground, midground, and a background. And then there's bloom. So basically you should be using this when rendering any object with any sort of lights. This is imitating the artifacts from cameras. That happens when it picks up direct light from any sort of light source, giving this light a halo-like effect or a glow. And lastly, when all that is done, render as a PSD and drop it into Adobe Lightroom. Here you can play around with things such as the exposure. You can sharpen some of those texture details, change up the contrast, maybe give it some tint to give it a little bit more liveliness, and also reduce some of the noise. And then all this together should make for a really nice render that you can display really proudly in your portfolio. And that concludes the video. Thank you so much for watching. These are just some of the few things that need to be nailed or considered when rendering, and also served as an introduction to the topics we'll actually be covering in the next few videos. So stay tuned for that, and also stay tuned for the third video where we actually go and make our first simple render. We'll be rendering out a classic pencil box. And also, if you have any questions or any helpful hints, make sure to drop them down below. I'll get to them as quickly as I can, and see you in the next one.